Let's get over to Rick Santelli in Chicago. He has a very interesting guest. Rick.
I do, and thank you, Simon. And before we welcome our guest, the title of his book is The Rotten Heart of Europe. And he was one of the first insiders in the 70s to start touching the blocks that eventually built what is now the integration of Europe and ultimately the European currency, the euro. But he left a handful of years before the euro was actually brought out. So, welcome, Bernard Connolly, and I guess my question to you is, why the title? Why did you see things differently than all those powerful insiders who thought of the plan of integration, and with the benefit and luxury of hindsight, who was right?
Well, the title, the Monetary Union project really is the heart of the whole European Union project. It's the foundation on which a political union is intended to be built. And it's rotten. It's produced a depression in much of Europe. We used to think that the policymakers would never allow a return to the conditions of the early 1930s. They have done in Greece, in Ireland, in Spain and Portugal. And what's more, they claim that those countries are now a success. Ireland is the poster child for austerity. Spain has turned the corner with 27% unemployment. Greece is exceptional. Yes, it has 67% youth unemployment. That's pretty exceptional. But the point is that monetary union has produced this disaster. And the people who've put the disaster in place hail it as a success. Now, are they crazy? If they are, that's pretty disturbing. If they're not crazy, then the question of why they've done it is even more disturbing. And why they've done it is twofold, or perhaps threefold. One can look back at the history of the European Union and note the claims made for it, that it's all about preventing a so-called Third European Civil War. The reality is that what the European Union is about is reversing the result as perceived by many people in Europe of the Second World War, that is to say, of a perceived triumph of an Anglo-Saxon system. Now, unfortunately, that Anglo-Saxon system never really existed in its full form, but there is, in effect, a clash of civilizations between an elitist, bureaucratic, corporatist, authoritarian, repressive set of institutions on the one hand, and that's essentially what the European Union is, and the idea, or the ideal, even if it's never really been instantiated in practice, of political legitimacy, of accountability, of democracy, of amity between countries, rather than an attempt at enforced harmonization between them, with, let me repeat, the monetary union being the main weapon for attempting to produce that harmonization, an attempt that has led to distrust, resentment, ridicule, contempt, even hatred between the peoples of European countries. So that's the reason for the title. Why did I take a different view from so many others? Well, at heart, it's because I'm an economist. I think if one thinks back to when the project was first being talked about, most economists thought that the project was economically lunatic, as it is. I'm not a politician. It's the politicians who've put monetary union in place. It's the politicians who are running monetary union. It's the politicians who have aims for monetary union to create a kind of superstate, and essentially an illegitimate, unaccountable, undemocratic, ultimately repressive, corporatist controlling superstate. So I think I'm right. If one looks at what's happened, it's hard to dissent from that.
I think many people would think you're right. Now, we're almost out of time. I want to ask you one last question. We have about 20 seconds. When I have you back 1 year from today, what changes or differences in the landscape of either the currency or the integration do you suspect we will find?
I think probably we'll still have the same members of the currency. There will be more attempts at something like a banking union, a disguised transfer union, but it won't be enough to present an economic, political, social and financial catastrophe in Europe. The potential ways of getting out of the mess are all just unthinkable. Massive euro depreciation, can't do it. for Germany's sake. Enormous transfer union, that would create a revolution in Germany. Carry on with the present austerity, you have a cycle of deflation, depression, default in the southern countries, more banking crises, more sovereign debt crises, and social and political crises. And I don't see any way of preventing that from happening.
Well, Mr. Connolly, it's been a pleasure, an eye-opener. I'm not saying I agree with all your issues, but considering your pedigree, I'm not sure that I should be questioning your ultimate outcome. Thank you for being our guest today.
Thank
Simon
you, Rick.
Hobbs, back to you.